Hello you guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Rebecca. If you haven't been here before, welcome. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about Hulu's Only Murders in the Building, diving into episode 4, Dirty Birds, and talking about all the clues and theories that I've come up with for this episode. So if you have not caught up and watched all the way until episode 4 of season 5, then make sure to pause this video, go catch up, and then come back because this is a full spoiler video. And yeah, we're going to be getting into the nitty gritty of it. But before we get into the video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, hit the bell notification, all that good YouTube stuff, because I'm trying to hit 2,000 subscribers by the end of the year. And every little bit helps. Likes, comments of what your theories are, sharing with friends who also like Only Murders in the Building, and checking out my other videos if you like that kind of thing. But without further ado, let's get into season 5, episode 4, Dirty Birds of Hulu's Only Murders in the Building. So the first thing is that this is another kind of like different style of video. Like the way it starts off, we kind of have the different billionaires that we met in the last episode doing different forms of media. So kind of like Bash is doing a TED Talk, Camilla White is doing a documentary style video, and Jay Flug is doing a live on his Instagram or whatever it is. So we know that the trio is stuck behind the bar in the Velvet Room, and Jay says that it's not a typical Saturday night, and Camilla says, I think our days of typical Saturday nights are over. So that's a little bit sinister. So the trio ends up escaping by kind of like throwing something across the room. They all turn, and then the trio races out of the room. And the trio assumes that the finger they found goes with what they call Jay's nub. So like, you know, he's missing a finger. So they believe that the finger they found is his. And their current theory seems to be that Lester was down in the Velvet Room, saw something that he shouldn't have seen, and that's why he was murdered. We meet the new Lester, which is a robot doorman, and Charles says that this is the beginning of the end of Old New York. And like we've talked about in the last couple of videos, which if you haven't watched them, go check them out, there is this like juxtaposition between new and old in this season. We're having a lot of conversations and discussions about the new versus the old, and like what is the best method of continuing, and like, are we more here for the old human like community style version of, let's say for example, a doorman, or are we here for efficiency, automatic doors, robots who deliver things for you, you know? And that's kind of the struggle that we have going on in this season between the new and the old, the mob and the new mob, old money versus new money, that kind of thing. The robot asks for fingerprints and irises, which is kind of suspicious, but also might just be like characterizing the weirdness of having a robot as a doorman. So the trio kind of head up to, I guess, one of their apartments, and Charles is doing toe raises, and this just kind of signaled to me that maybe he is trying to focus more on his health and like life and longevity. So we get into Oliver's apartment, and Vince Fish is here and tells everyone that he and Lester were birding buddies together and that he kept Lester honest. So he said that Lester had a knack for turning a robin into a bush tit. And really what this seems to mean is that Lester had a knack for being overly optimistic of certain situations. Like he would see a bird and be like, oh, it must have been this kind of bird, like this like fancy, like more rare species. And Vince would be like, no, that was a robin. So kind of like pulling Lester back down to earth and like making an honest man out of him. So Oliver exposes the murder board. It's a Putnam murder board, so it's got lots of sparkles on it. We hear them say that per Lester's notes, the gaming parlor only had 5 birds in on that Saturday night when everything went down. But they only go over 4 birds. And I did go back and look at the screenshot from last episode where we see the different kinds of birds and like what was on the paper in Nikki's mouth. And I only see 4 birds, but if they're telling us that there's a 5th, I find it interesting that like we don't know which bird that is. We don't know anything about that person. So there's a mystery fifth person who was in that room who either Lester didn't give a code name or he mentioned that there was 5, but he never said who that person was. So according to Vince and Oliver, they have decided that each bird associates with one person, as we said, like a code name. And they have decided that Nikki is the brown-headed cowbird because these are aggressive and mafia-like and they have retaliatory behavior. Now, I looked up the brown-headed cowbird because, as some of you mentioned in my last video, I didn't look them up. So here's the descriptions of them. So the brown-headed cowbird is known for laying their eggs in other birds' nests, which I think is really important in this season because this could symbolize some form of cheating or someone having a baby and their partner thinking that that baby was theirs when really it's someone else's. So the idea that the brown-headed cowbird really allows other birds to raise their children is very interesting. Then we've got Jay Fluke, who's the Eurasian jay. They didn't really give a description of this, but these are known for hoarding food and using strategies to outwit other birds through deception. So these are very smart birds. I know that his name is Jay, so it makes sense that he is the Eurasian jay, but maybe some of these traits do have to do with him. And we know throughout this episode we do see quite a bit of deception, so he might be the one who's leading that charge. They also mentioned that the company that his family owned made faucets and they ended up giving people lead poisoning, and then that company became a pharmacy and created a cure for lead poisoning. So we're kind of seeing this idea of like someone creating a problem through their product and then offering a solution but like making money off of that solution. So that's definitely, bad behavior. Next, we've got Bash Steed as the kakapo, and they say that this is because these birds live a really long time and that Bash is obsessed with living a long life. But these birds are also known to be solitary and flightless, and they only meet for breeding. So the females raise the chicks alone, and the male kakapos live a lone life, a solitary life. So this is another opportunity where you're like, okay, so this bird comes in, gets with the female bird, that bird lays the eggs, and then that kakapo is out of there. So could this be symbolism of like Bash actually being the father of a child that he left for someone else to raise? Then we've got Camilla White as the bowerbird, and they say that the bowerbirds make these like beautiful nests to attract mates, and that she is one because she's like an interior designer. Based on what they've said, these all do match up, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they actually are a little bit different or like rotate a bit, because obviously like we're going off of what the trio says, but you never know, maybe Bash Steed is the brown-headed cowbird and Nikki was actually the Eurasian jay. Like we're not 100% sure. This is just based on what they're telling us. So the trio decide that the best course of action here is to make a podcast trailer to lure Jay out of the woodwork and like get him to defend himself. They want him to seek a conversation with them. So they put out a trailer, they put in a lot of finger and like hand puns, and they wait and see what happens. As they're leaving, Mabel runs into Althea, and she kind of feels the need to defend herself. As we talked about in the last episode, Althea is very like high and mighty and kind of looks down upon Mabel's podcast, or at least that's how it's coming off. And Althea says, "Oh, Mabel, how's your little podcast going?" Which, can be like really demeaning. And apparently we learned that the podcast listens for their trailer are down 24% from last season, according to the robot. It's making the trio, I think, a little bit nervous. They need to up their game. So Mabel lies and says that she's actually signed a deal with One Defy, the same people who host the Drunk Sluts Do Murder podcast, and that like soon like they're going to be on One Defy's website and everyone's going to know who they are, basically. So Althea's like, "Oh, amazing. My publicist is a hired assassin and can totally help you out." This was like a weird thing to say, obviously, and could have just been for like the comedic value, but also with all of the murders that we have going on in the building, when someone says like, "Oh, my publicist is a hired assassin," it comes off like really suspicious. Like, what does that mean? Who is that? Who's your publicist? Like, could Althea be the next person to be murdered in the building? Like, what's going on here? So just like put a pin in it and keep an eye on it, kind of thing. So because Mabel lied, she does put in a pitch to WonderFi to try and make a podcast deal come true, because she does want to be successful and she feels like Althea just like brings this negative side out to her, but she wants to prove to her that she's a success and that their podcast is a success. And she explains to Charles and Oliver kind of the tea behind what's going on with her and Althea. She says that Althea was her only friend in middle school, but after Zoe passed away, Mabel really retreated into herself, really became solitary, and Althea pretty much abandoned her, changed a lot, found a brand new group of friends, and according to Mabel, turned everyone against her. So we could see why Mabel would feel so touchy, because she really trusted Althea and needed her during a hard time, and Althea abandoned her. Moving on, Jay Fluke does end up reaching out to them and says that he heard their teaser trailer and would love to come by for dinner. And so they kind of flash to the trio prepping Oliver's apartment to host Jay Flug. They're ready to get down to business and figure out what is really going on here. And Oliver's plan is to serve him salty and sweet so that he gets thirsty, and then only provide him with alcohol so that he gets drunk and he spills the beans. It's not a terrible idea. It's not the worst idea I've ever heard. So Charles is like, no. If we're having people over around 7 p.m., we have to make dinner, which, like, I kind of agree with. Like, if you invite me to an event that's over a meal period and then you don't give me food, I'm going to be grumpy. So Charles is making duck à l'orange, which is funny because it's another bird. It's just funny that they're, like, throwing in these bird references wherever they can. So Jay Flug comes early and Charles is like, we have an early bird. And he brings in his beer, which we know Oliver hates. And Jay says that he loves playing cards in the murder building and credits them, being like, well, you guys made it, the murder building. And Charles says, well, we give a lot of credit to the murderers, which, like, fair. So, of course, now Jay's here, and then all of a sudden, there's a knock on the door, and who's there but Camilla White, who apparently came to clear Jay's name. And then, of course, Bash shows up, and he's just like, yeah, I've been having you guys watched, and came to make sure you don't throw me under the bus, kind of thing. So all 3 billionaires are there. They basically are throwing out veiled threats like, you know, we wouldn't want to sue you for libel over including us in the podcast. Like, this is a warning to you. They claim that they don't know Nicky at all, that they knew that he ran the Velvet Room, but that they weren't, like, acquainted with him. And they say, you know, it was a mob hit. This is very open and shut. I don't really know why you're looking into this. You know, the trio pushed back and they're like, listen, we know you were there. Like, let's not mess around. Somehow Charles ends up saying that he and Oliver are doing Pilates. So this was just another throw-in of, like, they're working out, they're trying to concentrate on their health. Like, this has been a theme for Charles in terms of, like, being worried about dying alone. So maybe he's really trying to make sure that he's as healthy as can be, especially with what we learned at the end of last episode with him taking some sort of, like, mystery medication, which seems to be on some sort of, like, trial basis. And, you know, could this even tie back to the fact that Jay Flug's family owns this pharmaceutical company? Like, is there going to be a tie-in here? We'll have to wait and see. So the billionaires are surprised that the trio got their hands on the body. They realize, oh, you actually know a lot more about this than we thought you did. But they also say what I said in my last video, which was, can you admit that on a podcast you found a body and did, like, your own autopsy and didn't give it over to the police immediately? Like, isn't that a felony? So it seems like our trio is kind of realizing that their hands are tied. They may have gotten information from the body, but they don't really know if they can even use it because it's going to implicate them in letting the cops and everyone else know that they actually had access to this body and didn't turn it over immediately. So like whether they can even publish that is questionable at this point. So the trio decide the best way to go about this is to split these billionaires up and try and see if their stories match up, basically. Oliver takes Camilla, Charles takes Bash, and they decide to go make dinner, and Mabel takes Jay because they're both young. Camilla and Oliver are walking around. She hates his decor, and she says that she has played cards with Jay for a while and that, he has a tantrum like a toddler whenever he loses. So just a little pin for like a character trait about Jay, him being maybe reactive in situations where he doesn't get his way. We see Bash and Charles in the kitchen, and of course Bash grabs the meat cleaver, which is interesting because obviously that's what Nikki was murdered with, but also Bash hasn't cooked in years and probably has a whole staff to make him meals, so it's kind of ironic, like he doesn't know to just use a knife. And Bash ends up really giving Charles some advice, like, you're old, but if you change with the times and reinvent yourself, you don't have to feel old. You don't have to stay old. Like age is but a number, And Charles is like, oh, okay, like this kind of makes me feel a bit better, but like it's a lot of work to change and reinvent yourself and learn the new times. And Bash is like, I know, but like you can do it. And so this is like a moment of connection for Charles with Bash, which is like kind of interesting because Oliver calls them the weird kids. So it's funny, but also it's nice to see Charles kind of be like, oh, maybe I don't have to worry so much about my age and dying alone and like where I'm at in life right this very second. So next we go to Mabel and Jay. They're also connecting. Everyone's having a little connection moment. And Jay says that, he's been trying to use his family's blood money for good, and that he's, this philanthropist. He hired a friend to be his CEO who ended up stealing all the money from his nonprofit, and it made him look like a swindler. And Mabel says that she can relate because she had this friend, Althea, who, she trusted and ended up kind of stabbing her in the back and not being there for her when she needed it. So she admits to him that she, saw Thieve recently, the pop star, and that she told her that she was getting this deal at Wondify, and that now she has to go and actually pitch Wondify to see if she can get a deal there because she doesn't want to be proven to be a liar. So she's given this like pertinent information to Jay, which we obviously learned was very bad decision. Anyway, so the story for what happened from all of the billionaires ends up, checking out in the terms of like, they all say the same thing. They say that Nikki came in, guns a-blazing, he had a meat cleaver, he was livid and raving about the film Goodfellas, and that they claimed he was high on cocaine. Jay jumped up to stop him to protect everyone, and Nikki chopped off his finger. And then they all kind of ran away and left because the scene was not great. So this is interesting. There's the mention of Goodfellas, which is a typical and classic mob movie. The Goodfellas movie is interesting. It probably only plays a part in this show as being like a mob movie, but it is interesting that there are these themes of like the dark reality, like the truth behind the appearance of what looks to be a very glamorous and powerful life in reality is actually quite dark and alienating. So we've got that theme here. So we hear that dinner's going to be ready in 2 hours and 45 minutes. Great, Charles. That means it's going to be ready by like 10 p.m. And the billionaires are all like, case closed. We're actually good. We're busy. We're going to go. Thanks for having us over. And like, we're all good. You don't have to talk about us on the podcast anymore. And we can see that each one pretty much like charmed their counterpart into believing that they were innocent. Also, somehow Camilla White ended up renovating Oliver's dining room without him knowing. Like, there was no sound. We didn't hear it. So, like, that's a bizarre moment. It's one of those things that, like, in the show, you're like, is this just them being silly? Or is this, like, she knows about the tunnels? Like, how she ended up remodeling his dining room without anyone hearing and turning it all white is Beyond does. And Oliver basically says, you know, she's an interior design witch. But while he's saying that, we actually see 4 posters behind our trio in Oliver's apartment. Now, 2 of them, try as I might, I could not figure out what they were. So if you happen to have recognized them or could see them better than I could, make sure to drop that down in the comments below because I'm really curious. But from what I could see, there were 2. The Wild Duck and The Cherry Orchard. And these are both plays, which makes sense because that's kind of Oliver's whole persona and like decorative palette are all these like plays and musicals. But so let's look into The Wild Duck and The Cherry Orchard and see if these themes match this season. The Wild Duck. This is a story about a man who basically cheats on his wife with his serving girl, and she gets pregnant. His wife ends up dying of sickness. They say he drove her to death. And when the woman gets pregnant, he ends up marrying her off with the son of one of his partners to kind of cover it up. Ironically, this partner also goes to jail because this man like pins the crime of their business. Their business was something shady, and he like pins the whole thing on this partner, and this partner goes to prison. But this partner's son marries the girl, Gina. His son's name is Hyalmar, and he believes that the child that she is having is his. Whirl, who is the main man who got the woman pregnant and all that, Whirl's son, Gregors, comes to Hyalmar and says to him, you know, this daughter isn't really yours. This wife of yours cheated on you, or she was already pregnant before you got married. Like, you have to see the truth. And part of the plot of this movie is kind of like about idealism and the idea that like Gregors really thought that telling Hyalmar the truth would kind of set him free and bring him some sort of peace or happiness. But in reality, Hyalmar is brokenhearted. He starts to ostracize his daughter, and his daughter ends up killing herself in an attempt to prove her love for her father, who is not really her birth father. So it goes with this theme of like somebody's child is actually not their child, some sort of cheating went on, very suspicious, but we'll talk more about that in the theories portion of the video. Next, we've got The Cherry Orchard. It's a story of like a wealthy family who is unable to save their ancestral estate, which is like a famous cherry orchard, from being sold for auction. And basically they've lost all their money, they're in debt, and they're really against selling the cherry orchard in such a way that it would destroy the orchard itself. But this man comes in and basically says, this businessman, he's like, I'll buy the orchard from you and I'll cut down the trees, I'll build cottages, and like I'll basically save the property. And the old family's really against this. This is not what they want. But in the end, that's what ends up happening. And so the theme here is kind of like the clash between the old ways and the new ways, the old money losing power, being like dry, like full out of money, and ending up losing something that historically was theirs, and this kind of like new money businessman coming in, purchasing it, and making a profit off of it. The themes that I read online were progress versus nostalgia, decline of the old money families, and rise of the new money merchants. So this also relates to that overarching theme that we have this season of like old money versus new money, and like this change of this nostalgic past turning into this modern future. Progress versus nostalgia. So I thought that was really interesting. Next, we see the trio sitting down to eat the duck à l'orange because obviously our billionaires have left. They're not going to make it go to waste. So they eat it, and they're kind of all talking about what happened today. Oliver says that Camilla is a mix between Anne Margaret and Nanette Fabray. I looked up Anne Margaret, and I don't know how much this like really matters, but she was in the movie Bye Bye Birdie. She was like one of the main characters. So it's interesting that like she's in this movie that has Bird in it, famously known for being in the movie Bye Bye Birdie. Nanette Fabre, on the other hand, I could not find the same kind of call out. So if you happen to be familiar with Nanette and you know some sort of work that would be related to the show, then feel free to put it in the comments because I am at a loss here. I don't know how Nanette is related, but it's interesting that Anne Margaret wasn't Bye Bye Birdie. So all three of our trio are solidly sure that their person that they were with didn't do it. You know, Mabel says like, oh, Jay's a good guy. He was just trying to protect everyone. And Charles is like, hold on, Mabel. Did your eyelashes just flutter? And she's like, no, stop. And he's like, hold on. Like, it seems like you might have a little thing for Jay. And Oliver says, crushing on a subject, that's more of a Charles storyline, isn't it, Mabel? And this is ironic because they've all crushed on suspects. I mean, we've got Jan, who was literally the killer who Charles was in a relationship. But then we've also got Alice, who Mabel was in a relationship, who we were very suspicious of. And we even could consider Loretta to be a suspect in the show because, you know, she was definitely a part of it. So they've all actually kind of dipped their toe into the suspect pool. But it's funny that it's more associated with Charles just because Jan actually is a murderer. Semantics. So the trio are sitting there. They end up getting an email that says they are officially part of the 1 to 5 family and that their pitch was accepted and they are welcome to come in. So they go to 1 to 5, they're given a tour, they're shown their new podcast studio, they're really excited, they're like, this season's gonna be so juicy, and like, because we're going up against these like big, like famous billionaires, having the support of an organization like 1 to 5 to help fund us is actually really helpful. So they're signing the contract, they're excited. They've said, you know, our lawyer talked to your lawyer and we're good. And then the manager at 1 to 5 is like, that's awesome. We love that for you. But like, just so you know, you can't have a podcast that's like investigating any of the major stakeholders of 1 to 5. And we were recently acquired by a couple of new people. And then the big reveal happens and we figure out that the billionaires joined forces. They bought the majority stock of 1 to 5. And now the trio is literally unable to make a podcast, including them. So, you know, the trio was playing checkers, the billionaires were playing chess, and that's kind of the end of the episode, is the billionaires being like, if you know how to manipulate the game, then you can confuse your opponent, get the information that you need out of them, and the game is over before your opponent even knows what hit them. And that's truly what happened in this episode. And we also learned that the finger they have is not Jay Fluke's because of the direction that it curves in. Mabel's looking at Jay's finger, the one that he lost, and she's looking at, you know, the finger they have, and she's like, oh my gosh, like, these are two different people's fingers, basically. So there must have been another person in the Velvet Room the night that this all went down. The finger that they have is not Jay's. And that leads us to this continued idea of like, there was a 5th person in that room. We don't know who it was. We don't know why Lester wasn't taking notes on that person the way he was the other billionaires. But this person potentially lost a finger. And it's our job to try and figure out who that person was. So that's the end of episode 4, Dirty Birds, of Hulu's Only Murders in the Building. Now, let's dive into the theories because we have a lot of suggestions here. But first, I'm going to take a little break and then we'll come back. Okay, guys, I wanted to take a quick break in today's video to talk to you about Manta Sleep. Manta Sleep creates sleep masks that, you know, help you stay asleep and get to sleep, especially in maybe more uncomfortable environments, like when you're traveling on a train, on a plane, or if you are like me and you have a partner who likes to stay up a little bit later, keep the lights on, and you would like to go to bed, this is a great option for you. So this this is the Manta Sleep Sound Mask, and it comes with these speakers in the sides. And the reason that I chose this mask is, first of all, these masks have adjustable eyepieces, so you can take them off and place them exactly where you need to for the perfect fit for you. And second of all, I am really big into reading books before I go to sleep. You can also listen to like white noise. You can listen to rain sounds, but I really like putting a little bit of like an audiobook on before I go to bed. And the biggest issue is that when I'm wearing my big, like chunky headphones, I cannot turn on my side, and I am a side sleeper. So when Manta reached out to me to gift me a sleep mask and I saw that they had the sound mask as an option, I was immediately like, I need that 100%. So I'm always going to be honest with you about my reviews. This was gifted, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to tell you to buy it if I don't like it. I do genuinely like it. I will say that the sound quality is not, as good as if you're going to be wearing a set of headphones. It's a little different, but I didn't have a problem with it turning it up and like placing it. They also slide, so you can place the speaker exactly where your ear is located. So it's very adjustable, and they have a bunch of different versions. It's going to be perfect for traveling on a train or a plane. So if you are interested in buying a sleep mask, make sure to use the code BECCA10, BECCA10. I'll make sure to link it down below, as well as the Manta Sleep website. Thank you to Manta for sending this over. So let's dive into the theories from today's episode. So we got a bunch of clues, and a lot of them are leading us to believe that there's potential this season for somebody's child not being their child. So the potential that somebody was cheating, that other person got pregnant, and that person, the cheater, left the situation, and that person's partner thinking, oh, this is my son, my daughter, my child. And the more we see this, not only with the summary of Wild Duck, but also with the summary of Madam Butterfly, I believe that Madam Butterfly was the one, but this suggestion that like somebody's having a child and then someone else is raising it. We also see that with the brown-headed cowbird and the idea that they lay eggs in other birds' nests and then allow those other birds to raise their young. And even with the kakapo and the way that they come in just to mate and then leave the female kakapo to raise the young. So just this kind of like absent father, like possibility of someone's child not being their child and the partner not being aware of that. And I think that that's going to have a like big impact on this season. The question is who? And for me, there's really two options here. One is Sophia. So one is Sophia cheated on Nikki. She, slept with maybe one of the billionaires, or the fifth person that we don't know who it is. She had their child. It's one of the sons that we met. And, Nikki found out that one of his sons is not actually his child, went into that room guns a-blazing, furious, attacked people, and maybe it got him killed. Maybe it's the reason that he was taken out. The other option is Lorraine. Maybe Lorraine was cheating with Nikki or with someone else, or Lorraine already possibly had children when she met Lester. She had a carriage with her. I assumed that she was a nanny, but someone pointed out in my comments, what if Lorraine already had kids? What if she'd already been married when she met Lester? Maybe someone in that room was like a brown-headed cowbird and, left her with the kids, just left and abandoned her. So that leads to the theory of like maybe Lester figured out that one of these people was Lorraine's ex or was the person who fathered his children, and he was furious. He, went after them and he ended up getting killed for it. So those are two theories. The other theory is that the person who is the murderer is the child of whoever this cheater slash abandoner is, and that child was at the game, the fifth person, and that's why Nikki or Lester were murdered. But I really, really think that a child being someone else's and that person not realizing it is going to come into play, or like them realizing it and that being the drama for this season. Those are kind of my theories. I hope I made my thoughts clear, because it's a little bit complicated to be like the cheater and the cheatee and the person's child who's not really their kid, you know. But yeah, I think that's definitely going to come into play this season. So those are kind of my thoughts and feelings of today. And I think the biggest clue is just that continued theme of like, someone's child is not really their child, someone's relationship, somebody cheated, like that seems to be where we're headed. So we'll have to dig in and see what happens next. And this child could now be an adult. They could be like Mabel's age. They could be in their 30s. It could be Jay Fluke. Like, we don't know. So we just have to keep being open-minded and looking for this theme elsewhere. But I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you liked it, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, hit the bell notification, all that good YouTube stuff. I will be back next week with another video. Make sure to drop your theories and any clues that you saw down below. Anything that I didn't mention, feel free to mention. I love you guys so much, and I will see you guys next week with another video. Bye!